Looping statements in C# are used to execute a block of code repeatedly as long as the specified condition is true. These type of loops are going to be for loops, while loops, and do while loops. We're going to start with for loops. A for loop is going to execute a block of code a specified number of times. So let's run a quick example for that. We're going to say for, and then we're going to assign integer I to a data type integer, and then initialize it to 1. And then we're going to say I less than or equal to 5, put our semicolon, and then I plus plus. And under there, we're going to do our curly brackets, and we're going to want to print out the result of I in the end. And then under there, I'm going to do a console write line outside of the code and do for loop is done. Then I'm going to do one more, and it's really just going to be empty space there, just so we can have some gap in between each of our loops. But let's break down the for loop, right? So the for loop is saying for integer I while it's equal to 1, as long as I is less than or equal to 5, add 1 to I. This is our increment operation here, or operator here. Increment operators allow us to add 1 to whatever the initialization of our variable is. So as long as I is less than or equal to 5, this operator here is going to add 1 here. So then we'll see 1 all the way up until the number 5, and then we should see our console write for loop is done with an extra space at the end. So let's debug that code. And then if we check here in our terminal, we should see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for loop is done, and then we have our space. A while loop is going to execute a block of code as long as the specified condition is true. So let's try that with a while loop. We're going to do integer j is equal to 1. And then we're going to say while j is less than or equal to 7, console write line j. And then I'm going to take this code up here, copy, paste it, and I'm just going to say while loop is done. So what our while loop is saying is essentially the same thing as our for loop, but it's just a little cleaner in the code. And then I left out one thing. We're going to do a j++ because we want to check every single time. This while loop is going to check after it writes the line if this condition is still true. So what it's going to say is while j is less than or equal to 7, which we're going to start off with it being less than 7, it wants to write the data or the initialization of whatever j is to our terminal, and then it's going to add 1 to it. Then it's going to say, okay, 2 is less than or equal to 7. It's going to write out 2 and then add 1 all the way until it gets to 7. Then we should see while loop is done with our extra space there. So let's go ahead and run that. And then in our terminal, we'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. While loop is done with the space. And I put that space there so we can see which is which down there. Now, our do while loop is going to be similar to the while loop, but it's always going to execute a block of code at least once before it checks the next condition, or before it checks the condition of our current statement. So let's take a look at what that looks like. We're going to assign a variable k to the integer 1, or a data type with the initialization of 1. And then we're going to say do. So we're telling the computer already, hey, this is what I want you to do. I don't care what you see or whatever. I want you to write to the console k. And then I want to add 1 to k. Then what we're going to say is while k is less than or equal to, we'll do 8. That's going to tell our line of code here, or it's going to tell the computer, hey, k is equal to 1. This is what I want you to do. Write k, then add 1. And then we're going to check the while statement. So if k is now less than or equal to 8, then of course our code is going to end. And I'm going to take this, of course, and copy it one more time. And then we're going to say do while loop is done. So it's going to check all these conditions. So once it gets to 8, then it's going to say, okay, obviously I've reached my statement here. The while loop is done. And let's go ahead and print this out to the console. Let's go ahead and debug that, run it, and then we'll see we should have 1 all the way through 8, and then our do while loop is done. So it's similar to the while loop. It pretty much does the same exact thing, but instead, no matter what, it's always going to execute this no matter what happens. And that is just a way to make sure that you're kind of brute forcing allowing your code to run.